Hey, how's it going, captains? Admiral Tori here, and welcome aboard for another World of Warships video on my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be sailing the Tier 8 American heavy cruiser, the USS New Orleans. The New Orleans is one of my most favorite cruisers out of World War II. Historically speaking, the way she looks, and in World of Warships, to me, it is a delight to play the New Orleans. The New Orleans is one of the top highest decorated American warships out of World War II. The New Orleans herself as a ship earned 17 battle stars, and if you want to compare with all the other ships, the Enterprise, which is the highest decorated American warship out of World War II, earned herself 20 battle stars. The New Orleans was the last treaty ship to be limited. Every class of ship after the New Orleans was not limited by the London and Washington Treaty, which was revised in the 1930s. The first treaty, which was the Washington Treaty in 1922, did not define the New Orleans as a heavy cruiser. It would be the second treaty that would define the cruiser as a heavy cruiser, because originally the New Orleans was a light cruiser, and this is probably where people would say that the New Orleans is one of the worst cruisers to play at the higher tiers. It's because she is fairly difficult. She will not go easy on the captain at all. So it's going to require a lot of discipline, a lot of thinking about how to play the New Orleans. It's not like playing the Cleveland where you can just spray and pray and in hopes of some sort of result. At the same time, the Cleveland has a very difficult citadel placement, so it's pretty hard to face Clevelands at close range. While New Orleans lack armor in terms of her firepower. She does have a fair amount of firepower, but if you think about it, you got something like the Hipper, you got something like the Mogami, which has more guns than the New Orleans. Also, the Mogami has torpedoes, while New Orleans doesn't really have torpedoes. New Orleans overall is a utility ship, if I put it that way. Same way as I played the Nuremberg back in the days when I was trying to show you guys how to play the Nuremberg, because you just cannot front lines with the Nuremberg. You need assistance in order to make the Nuremberg work. So in the New Orleans case, you cannot go full-on aggressive with New Orleans. So New Orleans, how did she earn 17 honors? Well, she participated a lot of major events during World War II. And I think 3 particular events that I remember from the New Orleans, reading about New Orleans. As a treaty ship, she wasn't really appealing. And I was watching a video about the New Orleans, one particular sailor who wanted to sail aboard a carrier or a battleship, mainly because that would have been cool, because if you were sailing aboard something like the Iowa, the North Carolina, those big guns battleship, you were more recognizable. But he was assigned to a ship that was small, treaty size, limited, not as cool as something like a big battleship, even not as cool as the Baltimore, of course, because Baltimore was not limited by the treaty. He learned to love the New Orleans. It doesn't, when it comes to ships, it's not about the ship's dimension, capabilities, power. The heart of the ship will always be the crew, and the New Orleans was a perfect example. On the day of the attack on Pearl Harbor, New Orleans was pretty much in repairs. New Orleans, in terms of before the battle, she had some engine difficulties, so she didn't have power to move anything. When the Japanese Zeros came in with their Nakajimas and the Aichis, the New Orleans, the crew aboard, whether you're a cook, the person who is, cleaning, everyone aboard the New Orleans has been proven to be heroic on that day, because they just instinctively snap their fingers and get right to it. They pass the ammo. Since the New Orleans didn't have any engines working, the power was not working for the larger caliber AA. So the 127mm guns, although they weren't powered, the men aboard were able to try to make use of the AA, which is fairly difficult if you're trying to manually move a huge cannon. The lockers, which locked up the ammunition during the attack, the men aboard broke the lock, brought out the ammunition that they had, which from what I read was not much, and they tried to get the guns to work. Even if they were not trained to use the guns, they tried to make the guns work. I think at this point most Americans already figure out, especially in the military, now how to use a gun. So they brought out the rifles, they brought out any rifle, any gun that they have at the disposal. I don't know, maybe a Springfield, maybe the M1 Garand or Garand, depending on how you want to pronounce it. But basically, they were pushing themselves to the limit with the New Orleans because this was not a drill. This was the first major engagement that the Americans have ever witnessed. I mean, the last time that the Americans have ever witnessed something this big on their homelands is probably either the burning down the White House of Washington, D.C. when the British came in 1812, the Second Revolutionary War that not many people know about in the United States, which is kind of tragic. The American Civil War, of course, that was on our homelands. That's the Civil War. Come on now. So, yeah, the Battle of Pearl Harbor was a big deal, and while they were getting the ammunition, a lot of the anti-air was located on the upper parts of the superstructure, the second floor, and this ammunition was very heavy, so they were trying their best to use a pulley because the crane, remember, the New Orleans didn't have any power to maneuver any of the cranes or anything that could move heavy objects. So they were doing what they can, and after the battle, the New Orleans did not suffer any damage, even though technically she was not operational at the time. Second instance was the Battle of Midway. She was pretty much crucial in the Battle of Midway for escorting the Yorktown, the USS Yorktown during the Battle of Midway. She played a major role in that. She saved the men aboard the USS Lexington CV2, the one that was being burned down in the Battle of the Coral Sea by the Shokaku and the Zuikaku Japanese aircraft carrier. The Lexington, as you guys know it, she was very volatile. She took like 2 dive bomb hits and 2 torpedo hits, and they just couldn't save the behemoth. So the New Orleans came in, and I believe overall they saved 900 men aboard the USS Lexington, which they will be transferred to the Essex class Lexington. Another more memorable picture that I will show you guys is the Battle of the Tassafaronga, if I pronounce it correctly. A lot of these names are foreign to me, so I'm going to try my best to pronounce it. But in this particular battle, she was with the USS Minneapolis. I believe the USS Minneapolis was also a New Orleans class heavy cruiser, and which is crazy because if you search up on Google the top highest decorated ships, these ships weren't that as cool looking as the Baltimore or the Iowa. These were like the pre-war ships. These were the ships that weren't fully in terms of engineering, they were still being tested. There were still some flaws, but like I said, the heart of a ship, of any other ship in World War II, whether it's Japanese, American, German, will always be the crew. And in this battle, the USS New Orleans was trying to avoid a collision with the USS Minneapolis, if I recall correctly. Hopefully that's the right ship I'm looking at. But basically, in World of Warships, if you collide with someone else, you probably do like 0.5% of their health. In real life, if you collide with a ship, you could sink both ships at once, which would be really bad. So the New Orleans was in a collision course against the Minneapolis, and if I remember, it was a night battle. Whatever battle it was, basically the Minneapolis was trying to avoid a torpedo wave from the Japanese, and the New Orleans, in the path of a collision, she basically think fast and turned hard away from the Minneapolis, but unfortunately she also took a torpedo to the bow, and this is where it really gets interesting. But a third of the ship got blown off, and you will see the picture right now. Her first turret caused a magazine detonation. Men lost their lives on that day, but although her detonation and blowing off her bow, in most cases in World of Warships, you take one torpedo, you just lose a lot of health. You send your message in the chat blowing sailor's mouth. But in real life, this should have sunk the New Orleans. It only took one torpedo in most cases to sink a cruiser or a destroyer, at least do a lot of damage. 2 torpedoes, 3 torpedoes is just, you're asking to be sunk. But 1 torpedo was already bad enough with the detonation, and in World of Warship, when you get detonated, you're already dead. But in the New Orleans case, like I said, the heart of the crew. The men aboard were brave enough to damage control the situation, which, in this case, the New Orleans should have been sunk. I mean, she lost a third of her ship. But she didn't sink because of the damage control superb ability, and they were able to bring the New Orleans away from the battle and save her. There was a moment where they couldn't do anything with the New Orleans in this situation. So what the Americans did was they camouflaged the ship with jungle debris like trees, bushes, and wait for help. And once the New Orleans was able to get assistance, she was tugged to a port with her own power, and they basically put on a fake bow. I believe this bow was made out of wood. I know, right? Crazy. You put a wooden bow onto a steel ship, and she was able to make it back to Pearl Harbor to do a full-on overhaul, because New Orleans, remember, during the attack on Pearl Harbor, before the attack, New Orleans had a unreliable engine. She only had like a 3 out of 4 engines working, so they were trying to fix the engine, and she still had problems with her engine. And during the battles of World War II, the early parts of World War II, although they know that the engine has some problems, they still persist to use the New Orleans because the United States was desperate to get every available warships to fight the Japanese, because the Japanese were steamrolling them in the first 6 months of the war. So after that particular battle, they were able to bring back the New Orleans, because this was the crucial moment to fix her bow, get the first turret back, and get her a new engine, which they did. In terms of getting the engine out, just think about it. You gotta remove the deck, you gotta remove this, that, in order to put the engine. So yes, the New Orleans was put out of the battle for quite some time, but the American industry kicked in, and they were able to bring the New Orleans back into the battle. So after she was overhauled, she continued to fight from 1941 to 44 and 45. And yes, she survived the war, and that is how she earned herself 17 hard-fought battle stars. Now, this is just the ship herself. The crew aboard also earned themselves Purple Hearts and their own battle stars. If I recall correctly, they earned at least 60 stars on the crew part of the ship. So New Orleans, definitely a respectable ship, but in World of Warships, people rarely talk about the New Orleans. The most you ever hear about the New Orleans is that the New Orleans was an awful ship for people who are grinding on the American ship cruiser line. So if you're coming from Pensacola, if you're expecting the New Orleans to be an upgrade, she is a big upgrade. I can say that right now. The biggest thing that is the upgrade with the New Orleans was her concealment. The problem I had with the Pensacola was that her concealment was worse than a New Mexico concealment. And since everyone knows that Pensacola has thin armor and you have awful concealment, you're going to be the first person to be shot at. And in most cases, it's not going to go so well when you're getting shot by those 406 or 410 millimeter guns from the Nagato or Colorado. So New Orleans still has the armor problem. Her firepower isn't as comparable to with the torpedoes and guns like the Mogami, Hipper, and the Chapaya with her rapid firing guns like 152 or 155, I don't remember. But yeah, New Orleans, like I said, she will give the captain a hard time. But like I said, the heart of the ship will always be the crew, and in this case, in World of Warship, the heart of the ship is the captain. If you discipline yourself, if you understand how to work the New Orleans is actually a fabulous ship. I don't think the New Orleans is a bad ship. I think she's one of the most powerful ships on the American texture line. It just requires a lot of discipline and a lot of work to understand to play the ship. Same thing goes with the Japanese Amagi. Amagi is really good battleship, but not many people play her because it requires a lot of work, constant maneuvering, which you're going to apply to the New Orleans. So New Orleans armor and firepower isn't really there to the standards, which is why a lot of people don't like the New Orleans. It's because armor and firepower, that is the biggest thing that people care about in World of Warships. So New Orleans is a utility ship. You come with the defensive fire, and ultimately you get the radar. With the New Orleans, the way you should be playing the New Orleans is really to understand the situation in terms of when to engage, when not to engage, because remember, you do get the concealment. I think the special uniqueness of the New Orleans, aside from her historical significance, but from the perspective of the game, she has a characteristics of being the best handling cruiser to play. This thing handles, turns on a dime, and That's what I love about her. She just handles very well with her concealment, and I just like the guns also. Although she doesn't have the numerical advantages like the Atago or the Mogami, or the torpedoes like the Hipper, her guns have a very nice shell arc because, well, not shell arc, her firing angle. Her shell arc isn't that great because American heavy cruiser guns, they tend to hang pretty high with the shells, but then again, the arcs you can shoot over the islands more easily. So yeah, she does have the angle and she has the maneuverability. Those are the two characteristics that you want to capitalize with the New Orleans. You want to maintain a 10 to 15 kilometer brawling distance with the New Orleans. New Orleans won't do so well against another tier 8 average cruiser unless you're facing a light cruiser like the British Edinburgh. Close range, if she broadside against New Orleans, of course New Orleans is going to win, but that's her only advantage at brawling, is because 2/3 of her firepower is facing forward, so you can actually angle while something like the Hipper got to get her broadside on in order to get most of her firepower, because then you're going to be working with 50% for guns with the Hipper. Same thing goes with the Mogami. I mean, Mogami has a lot of firepower facing forward, but she kind of still has the angle for the second turret. So New Orleans, that's her only, advantage of close range. Her health, like I said, she's very flimsy. If you want a perspective, you take a look at the Cleveland. Cleveland has a health pool of 35,200. New Orleans being a treaty ship, she only has 35,400. You're basically working with a Cleveland hull, but the funny thing is that New Orleans has thicker armor than the Cleveland, but Cleveland survives better because of how really wonky her citadel. The problem with the New Orleans is her citadel really is. So yeah, you're gonna get citadel from the stern or the bow. And the trick here is, like I said, maintain the distance, capitalize on your maneuverability. So meaning that with concealment, you want to grab concealment expert for sure. That's the first thing you should grab for the New Orleans. The modules upgrade, you want to grab. People were saying that you should get more concealment and you could bring down the concealment to like 9 kilometers. To me, the concealment only works for surprising cruisers and destroyers. And like I said, you don't want to be brawling against another cruiser because you're still a treaty ship. So in most cases, you won't do well. And even if you win the brawling battle, it's safe to say that you're going to take a lot of damage. And how useful are you at in that point of the game? So I went with the steering gear modification 3 because I'm trying to capitalize on her short dimension and turning really hard with her rudder, because she just has superb handling. You want to dodge those shells. You want to be in the combat, dodging in the adrenaline rush moment. So with that, I want to double up with the steering gears modification too. So these are two things that will really make the difference with the New Orleans. Yes, you can bring it down, but like I said, you don't want to be below 10 kilometers unless you need to. So how often are you going to be below 10 kilometers? Probably 10 to 20% of the game when you really need to, like capturing a flag or taking out a destroyer or a friendly destroyer offering a smoke to smoke you up. So in most cases, you're going to be spotted because you're going to be firing guns if you want to make use of your firepower, and ideally you want to grab the steering gear modification too. And I'll show you guys in the game of how to dodge the shells, because the idea was that although you don't have the survivability, you have the handling to dodge the shells. And of course, you want to grab some sort of camo to increase the dispersion on the battleships that are firing at you. AA wise, not so great. Cleveland has better anti-air than the New Orleans. I don't remember the Pensacola, maybe the same level as the Pensacola. Artillery, I really do like these guns. Like I said, these are the 203mm guns. These are one of the coolest looking guns. Although they're very close to each other, a lot of people think that just because these guns are closely packed to each other, like the Arizona, in reality, historically speaking, these guns weren't that accurate because of the shock and vibration from each guns if they were to fire full on broadside, from my understanding. Which is why you look at something like the German battleship, like the Bismarck, there is a huge gap between the left and the right barrel. Same thing goes with the Yamato and the Iowa class battleship. But remember, this was a treaty ship. This was a brand new ship at the time before the war, and there were still some engineering flaws with the ship, so they haven't really fixed that issue until something later on. Just look at the Arizona compared with the New Mexico. New Mexico is newer than the Arizona. The difference between the Arizona and New Mexico is that the New Mexico's guns barrels were much more separated compared to the Arizona. Aside from that, let's jump right in the game with the New Orleans. Alright, you guys, welcome aboard the USS New Orleans. We're playing on a map called Neighbors, and I have the nice navy blue camo on the New Orleans. So this is a replay. This is the first time I have ever used the replay system on World of Warships. I knew the system was in the game for a very long time. The reason why I didn't use it in the beginning was because I just don't like how the replay looks, because sometimes it's laggy. There's things that are missing, like me turning, doesn't show me turning, or show me like going forward in terms of pressing the buttons on the left and right, this, that. It doesn't show the reticule. Also, it's kind of sloppy in cases, very slow, weird zooming. And the reason why I have the replay now is because if you ever record any game on a PC, you know for a fact that the files are huge. So I decided that since I play a lot of games, I get tired of recording, tapping out, deleting the file, recording, tapping out, deleting the file. I decided that, number one moment, there was a point where my hard drive filled up and I didn't realize that, so it stopped recording halfway. And when you can have the option of using the replays to sacrifice some of the quality in terms of the way you view the game, you can save a lot of space, because replays are like 2.8 kilobytes, much smaller. So yes, we're going to be using replays. Probably in the future videos I'm going to have more replays. Sometimes I won't do replays. I think Carrier's replays are the worst. It's just awful to look at. So look at that, the reticule is not even fully turned, but yet I'm able to fire all my guns. That is a problem with the replay. So we are facing some sizable fleet here. I am selling broadside. So the tactic here, remember, the New Orleans is one of the greatest ship to handle. If you have something really great about a ship, she can't possibly be a bad ship. So since the rudder shift is like a destroyer, which is like 3.3 seconds with both the rudder modification, this thing turns like, I can't even describe how hard this thing turns, but look at that. I dodged the salvo. Here goes for another salvo from the Tirpitz, turning, cutting a speed hard to the starboard side, and yeah, look at that. Tirpitz just misses. Also with a great concealment, nobody spot me after the Ognivoid dies. So this is what you want to utilize. You want to be at least, I want to say average around 13 to 15 kilometers, but the real range is 10 to 15 kilometers. The lower you go, the higher chance of you dying. When you need to frontline, do so. But when you don't need to, you just need to weather the enemy down. Do not frontline with the New Orleans. Do not peek with the New Orleans. It is not your job to scout with the New Orleans unless you have to. Most likely late game where you're the only cruiser alive and you got a bunch of battleships on your side and there's a destroyer that is just messing around with your battleship, then yes, frontline with the New Orleans when you need to, because you do have radar at your disposal. Radar is one of the greatest things about the New Orleans, but that is where it ends. So you notice how I'm abusing the tactic in the early parts of the game of showing a broadside. I want to bait the shot on the battleship. Everyone knows that a battleship averages around 30 seconds per salvo. So imagine going broadside, battleship sees you, oh, looks like a great broadside target to fire at. Fires at you, you got the priority target, you got the indicator telling you that someone's firing at you. Hard rudder, cut the speed, you turn really hard, and they all miss. That is, compensating for the fact that you know that the New Orleans doesn't have that great of a survivability. Like I said, distance and maneuvering is very key. It is a lot of work, but just like the Amagi is a great battle cruiser. You just need to do the work in order to make it work. It's not a easy peasy ship to grab onto. It is a ship that requires a lot of discipline. So I'm pounding on this Nagato. Like the HE, American AP is also brilliant. You will know some great AP parts on the later part of this game, but in most cases I use the HE beyond 8 kilometers because I just don't get consistent results with AP, even though American AP are great. Burn down the Nagato. Gonna start focusing on this Iowa. Now, from my understanding, the American cruisers have the worst show velocity, so you gotta lead a lot. It's pretty easy to dodge New Orleans shots. Iowa sailing in a straight line. She seems to be about to run aground. And yeah, she might be running aground there. Enemy team has stacked the C side while we stack the A side. Key here is just like the Nuremberg video I've done, you want to stay with your team because you want the enemy team to shoot at multiple targets. Think about it. Battleship fires at you, you maneuver out of the way. Another 30 seconds, fire at you again, maneuver out of the way, and now he's gonna get sick of shooting at you, so they're gonna pick a different target on your team. But if you're the only target, they're gonna continue shooting at you while they try and sail around and find something different, and that increases your chance of getting hit really hard by those shells. I'm utilizing the Benson or Fletcher smoke. He was able to lay down smoke, might as well utilize it. Try to get all my guns to bear. Firing at the Iowa, I like to follow my shells when it comes to long range engagement because I need to know where they land. Looks like the Taiho dropped torpedoes onto the Iowa. Gonna continue firing, providing the fire support. It's all about fire support with the New Orleans. Just keep in mind, fire support. Not frontlining, not doing crazy things, not going in with your torpedoes as the Otago. Frontlining. Work slowly, piece by piece. Now, enemy team is about to peer right around that corner onto the B flag. The Tashkent is taking the B flag. I was able to score a very lucky 2-fire hit on the Iowa. Looks like the Iowa is going to be burning to death because she used her damage control on the earlier attack by the friendly Taiho. The Great Phoenix strikes again, right? Still maintaining my distance. Notice that I'm still maintaining it. Now I'm going to switch targets to the Tierpitz. Let's see if we can get some hits on the Tierpitz. Enemy S6 is still searching for the Taiho. Her dive bombers are going in, just looking on the minimap. My team on my port side is going for the flank, and 3 of my battleships are on my right side, so we're going to start pushing in hard. Nagato is selling broadside. Not really a smart idea to go broadside against the Tierpitz here. But then again, Tirpitz only got 50% of firepower facing forward. Now I do spot the arpeggial, was it Hagero? No, Miyoko. With the Atagos, 2 Atagos, and they both selling broadside. This is a perfect moment to load in the AP. New Orleans AP pounds hard. I love the AP on these guns. It's one of those weird things where, like the Leander doesn't have that many guns and doesn't pack that hard of a punch, but it's just really fun to use those guns because of how they feel. It's just me, I don't know what it is, but people feel differently. If it's not powerful enough, it doesn't feel so well, right? But to me, it doesn't matter. I just like firing the guns, and the New Orleans is one of the most funnest ship to fire the guns. So I'm slowing down, turning hard to the starboard side, and the Tirpitz misses again. I'm trying to bait this shot here. I want the Tirpitz to fire at a predictable direction because I know he's going to be firing at the broadside. So what I do is I sail broadside and assume that he's going to fire the broadside. The moment he fires 10 kilometers, enough time for me to turn hard to starboard, and the Tirpitz misses. Remember, Tirpitz reloads like 25 seconds per salvo, or 26 for stock. So our 2 fires. I don't have Demolition Expert on the New Orleans, but I do recommend getting it. This captain is very old, very, very old. So I haven't been playing New Orleans for quite some time. I would have gotten the Demolition Expert, but yeah, I was a Superintendent because I thought I was going to use the defensive fire or radar as much as I can, but that isn't the case because I'm at a distance. So what's the point of radar and defensive fire? How often do I get a carry in my game or a battleship following me? Here goes another salvo from the Tirpitz. Unfortunately, I was just too slow and I'm going to take a hit, but luckily, as the treaty ship having very thin armor, Tirpitz 380mm guns penetrated, or at least over penetrated. I am spotted again by Tirpitz. Tirpitz is getting a little bit frustrated. Priority target is telling me that 2 people really want me dead. So now I'm going to sail, and this is going to be a big hit. No, straddle. Tirpitz secondaries are going off, and I know I'm pretty in a pretty bad situation. Okay, now those are big hits. I think those are from the North Carolina. So look how easy it is to citadel the New Orleans. It kind of feels like playing the Omaha with 203s on there. Not literally, because Omaha's armor is thinner than this, but you get the idea. Omaha has great maneuverability. Our Omnivoy went in kamikaze on them, but think she was able to drop torpedoes. Yes, she did. She dropped torpedoes. Let's see if those hit the North Carolina. I'm trying to sail away. Here comes a salvo from the North Carolina, but it looks like it's not going for me. It's actually going for the Otago, so I don't know why it says that it was going for me. Maybe she locked onto me, but she was actually aiming at the Otago at the last second. Here comes the Tashkent. Soviet coming in. She's charging right in the B flag. And she's dead. She got detonated. Now at this point, I'm trying to figure out what should I do. Our friendly battleship on the right side are still visible. Looks like they're taking a lot of beating because remember, the entire enemy team is right at that center part of the map. And I can't see because of the 8-kilometer concealment on the Cyclone and the smokes are in the way. So I use my radar. Found a broadside Edinburgh. Start loading the AP quickly. Score a big broadside hit onto the Edinburgh. 7 out of 9 hits. Here comes the killing blow. Somebody firing at me, so I'm gonna maneuver crazy while I'm at it. Goodbye, Edinburgh. 3 citadels. Now Otago is firing at me. Edinburgh dropped torpedoes, or is it? No, those are Otago's torpedoes. Gotta fire the Otago. Or, yeah, the Otago. Goodbye, Otago. Or is it the Arpeggio Takayo? And looks like my luck has run out because this is going to kill me. Yeah, see what happens when you're too close to a battleship. You're destined to die. But nonetheless, it was a great battle. The Tirpitz is the last person alive. And overall, I do like the New Orleans. I think it's a fun ship. Not for everyone, for sure. But thanks for watching, guys. And I'll see you guys next time on World of Warships.